All right, guys, just give me a split second while I get the other stream live. Wait a minute. Is this the same? Yeah, these are identical. Uh-oh. Just a minute, guys. I appear to have made a slight error. There we go. Okay. As soon as I get this one open, we'll be good to go. And this is going to be a good one. I'm in full monk mode for this this stream. Let me know, please, about problems with the audio or whatever in the comments, because I've been having a ghost in the machine as usual, and I don't know if it's me or if I'm cursed or what, but as promised, after the debacle of the Trump assassination attempt and all of that, I was like, I'm not dealing with this stuff anymore. And to an extent, I regret it, because so much has come to light that I didn't know before. It doesn't change anything except that it just makes me more confident in my assessment of it. But yeah, it is hard to ignore, and not because I'm particularly interested in politics, but because it really, to me, is like the easiest template to use to elucidate the problems with consciousness and awareness that we have. But on a brighter and more interesting note, in my opinion, this is actually, just as much as like this is one of the most distressing times in human history from my point of view, it's also one of the most promising, and for me, it's actually been extremely validating over the last couple of months, because a lot of the ideas that I have intuited and that have come to me through visionary states, and, bearing in mind that I think one of the unique traits that I have in this genre, I guess, in this domain, is that I really try to keep myself informed of scientific ideas and the current state of physics and neuroscience and all of these things. And so these visionary experiences are informed by these things to an extent. And you could say that influences or shapes them, but I can assure you that it's been at least a little bit tilted in favor of the pure intuition and visionary aspect of it. And so over the years, things have happened. My obsession with light and consciousness and this certainty that there was some fundamental connection, which of course, that's not anything, that's a really common, widespread idea, but I was certain that it was correct, and that also that we could prove it. And we've come very close to that. Michael Levin, who is on the screen here behind me, is a Harvard-educated biologist who is basically turning the old paradigm of morphology and DNA and all of these things that have kind of defined the materialist paradigm completely on their heads. And this is the first time, I believe this is from the Theory of Everything interview, where I've actually heard him speak about synchronicity and kind of admit to being a panpsychist. And so, this is in a way a major landmark. In a lot of people's opinions, Michael Levin is basically the Einstein of the current period, certainly revolutionizing biology. And on top of all that, there are some experiences that I have shared on this channel, one of which is possibly the most formative and important, and it had to do with a solar ritual that occurred during a solar storm that I was unaware of. And Michael Levin's ideas about morphology and an electromagnetic field sort of overruling, not his ideas, I mean, experimentally he has established these things, particularly with planarium worms. But Rupert Sheldrake was kind of laughed out of town back in the 90s, I think, for suggesting a lot of the things that now Michael Levin has proven. And to tie all that back into my own story, there's actually two facets of this that really struck a chord with me. And one of them is that Rupert Sheldrake, in a recent talk that I reacted to on this channel, talked about the sun being conscious, but not only that, but that it uses these periods of solar intensity to communicate with people or with the consciousness on Earth. And it was just mind-blowing, 10 years after the fact, to hear Rupert Sheldrake, whose theories of morphology seem to have been confirmed by this a little bit more accredited gentleman, Michael Levin here. I had experienced that myself, and with a sort of proof, that I didn't know until I went to the gas station the next day that it had been this massive solar storm during this ritual. There was another aspect of it that comes into play with this live stream. After we get done with Michael Levin here, we're going to watch a few segments from, I didn't even look to see what the physicist's name is. We'll have to see in a minute. But this gets a little bit more difficult to talk about, but during this period I call the Phoenix process, I had a dialogue going with something that I've never decided was separate from me necessarily, but it certainly knew things I had no way of knowing. So I walked away from it basically with the understanding that we do have non-ordinary, non-traditional or non-ordinary access points to information. And so during that period, I was informed of the fact that the Big Bang is a cyclical process, that it began as a point of almost infinite nothingness. It expands until there are no more possibilities, and it collapses back in on itself. And that there are two sides of a veil that acts as a sort of Fourier transform that converts the ideal to the actual in one sense, but also reverses these things as they pass through. And during that solar ritual, one of the things that this voice told me, because I was being guided through this process by this voice, right? My birth name is Harley, and that voice said, I was like, well, what do I do? What do I say? And it said, well, what is your name backwards? And I was like, Yel-Ra? And it didn't just say, what is your name backwards, actually. It said, remember how you had this vision of this veil that reverses things between, worlds? At any rate, without going too deeply into it, you guys can find that video somewhere on my channel. I think I talked about it in the last Phoenix process video in a lot of depth, and also a ritual magic video that's years old now. But all of these ideas are now have either recently emerged in physics in the form of things like quantum loop theory, and this idea of the veil and the Fourier transform and the whole thing is explained by this physicist in this other video. And it also references the idea of these higher orders of symmetry, which is the reason that synchronicities have the glyph 1111. Right? It's symmetrical. The 111 is the internal microcosm, and the other 11 is the external macrocosm. And the idea is that as we individuate and we create a dialogue between the conscious and subconscious mind, that also brings our internal and external experience into homeostasis. And that's what produces these synchronicities, which I've always taken as the methodology that God or the universe has to use to talk to us, because it is constrained by its own laws. So it can't do these sort of magical, mystical, fairy tale God things that a lot of religious people believe in, but there are still ways for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear to perceive these things. And so this live stream is kind of a double whammy, because we have Michael Levin on the one hand giving his opinion about synchronicity, which I'll not spoil. And then after that, we're going to get into a physical basis for all of these ideas. And this, the relevance of all these things to the story that I've been plotting and sharing for all of these years is going to be a lot more clear to the people that have followed me for a long time. And I do want to thank all of those people for doing so. Please also hit the like button, share, subscribe, consider joining me on Patreon. Before we get into it, I'm going to check in with the chat and make sure that the audio is okay. And we have an audience, so I'm going to assume that it is fine. Let's see. Okay, and if my camera disconnects, we don't really care, because As long as the audio is working, but something's weird. If I bump my table, everything's going to crash. So that's why I'm so monked up, so I can, make sure that doesn't happen. First and foremost, let's hear Michael Levin talk. I'm going to stop it a lot because I recently got a strike for doing this, and another one will put me in a very bad way. So I'll probably have a lot to say anyways, but yeah, we're going to have to do this in little bits.
But I think we are actually a collection of interacting perspectives and interacting consciousnesses. And, then sometimes people say, well, I don't feel my liver being conscious. Right, you don't, but you don't feel me being conscious either. Of course you don't. And the fact that your left hemisphere has the language ability for us to sit here and talk about it, and the liver doesn't actually mean that it's not conscious. It just means that we don't have direct access to it, and we don't have direct access to each other. So that doesn't bother me. So that's my suspicion about consciousness, is that for the same reason that people think it's in the brain, we should take very seriously that it's in other places in the body. And then more generally, other types of constructs that are not human bodies at all, or not even animal bodies.
You've spoken to Bernardo Kastrup several times now. What is it you agree with him the most that you think most people would disagree about? Because you agree with him that it's nice to go for a walk. Okay, sure, but most people agree it's nice to go for a walk. So what is it that you agree with him about that you think is a contentious issue to most people? So this is a controversial statement. And then what is it you disagree with him about regarding consciousness?
Yeah, boy, I don't, it's hard for me to know what most people agree or disagree with him about. I really don't know. We agree on a lot of things. We agree on, I think, the primacy of consciousness. I think that his idealist position has a lot to recommend it. The one thing I think we disagree on is the issue of compositionality. So if I recall correctly from a talk that we had together a little while ago, he felt that it is important, in order to be a true self, to have a conscious experience as an inner perspective, you have to be, he focuses on the view of embryonic development as a single system that, whatever subdivides and develops, but it starts out as a single system. And I was arguing that really is just a contingent feature of biology. I mean, we certainly.
Okay, so my first interruption is that it's important to note throughout that part of the point of this is that one of the things that I'm sort of suggesting is that I have been able to see a lot of the things that science is just starting to elucidate just by using the lenses of not only intuition, but ancient knowledge and Hermetic thinking. And so one of the primary ideas from that sort of system is that the physical is reflected in the, or the energetic energetic's not even the right word. The metaphysical, the formative, spiritual elements of this stuff were reflected in the physical. So if you consider this idea of, this nothingness that became conscious, and that realization, I am, what is it, hey, I am that I am, that introduced duality, and so the one became two, and he says that's a fundamental process in biology, and I think it's a fundamental process of both the biology of the universe, the macrocosm, and the microcosm.
You can take two early embryos and mush them together. You get a perfectly normal, embryo out of it. And in general, there are lots of biological systems like our xenobots, like anthrobots, that you can create by composition, by pulling other things together. So I don't give as much, I don't put as much emphasis on a system being demarcated from the outside world because it was somehow. Because it started out that way and it sort of remained, disconnected. I think I think that's kind of a superficial aspect of the biology, and you can do things a different way. I don't think that's what what's responsible for. But he you know, I think he thinks it's important that individual selves are not compositions. They're not made as compositions. They're somehow you know, individualized from the word go.
And on that note, speaking of microcosm, macrocosm, if you do a quick Google search, you'll discover that the idea that everything is fundamentally conscious in the universe has become such a ubiquitous idea that even CNN and NBC have done stories on the number of scientists that are suddenly saying that even particles have some kind of fundamental intelligence. Otherwise, you know, how do we explain the collapse of the waveform? And how do we explain that electrons are being watched? And even more fundamentally, nothing that doesn't have some kind of fundamental intelligence does anything, we've discovered. So, you know, when you look up a definition of energy, scientific definition of energy, you get the ability to do work. And so digging down that rabbit hole, I discovered that a lot of physicists describe particles not as a thing, but a tendency in a certain spot in the field, basically, a behavior. And so if you scale that up, you know, to the level of chemical even, you know, you have chemicals reacting with chemicals in very specific ways, and it's still very fundamental. But then we go to another level, to the cell, and things get even weirder. We have single-celled organisms that are capable of pretty sophisticated behavior, not only in terms of finding food and reproducing, but also slime mold engineering subway systems better than human engineers. And so from there, you know, you realize that we are a collective of these smaller systems that all exhibit intelligence. And so if you, you know, Michael Levin calls them cognitive light cones. So you keep scaling these things up, and then you have, you know, a collection of organs that all behave in a way that's basically intelligent. It's orchestrated. They're all interacting to support a single goal that is not explicitly related to their individual functions, and yet they're holistically able to produce a coherent system. And then you scale it up another level, and you have an animal, and that animal is capable of, you know, without having an awareness of all of the intelligences that it's composed of necessarily, it's able to go about doing things. And it has a spectrum of will and function that's determined by how long it lives, its type of self-interest, and so on, until you get to human, who has a very large cognitive light cone. But then beyond that, we have the civils, you know, towns, cities, states, nations, planet. And then if you just follow this logic, the idea that even planets and stars are intelligent units that compose a larger whole, some greater intelligence, is kind of a logical extension of that. And so now, I mean, it's almost difficult to wrap your head around the magnitude of this, that, you know, our observations and science is now pivoting from this sort of blind, random universe to something that is very, very different from that conception.
Which again, even the egg, right? So we humans like eggs because we can see it as a distinct little thing with a membrane. You say, there's a, you know, an individual. But even an egg is composed by the maternal organism from molecular components. I see no point at which any of this is truly distinct from anything else. So I put less emphasis on it, but I think he thinks it's important.
It seems like the point that you're saying is, look, we can think about this as several rooms. This building comprises several rooms, but even in, and Bernardo may say that's what makes a person is the distinct rooms. But you're saying, yeah, but even in a room, there are different people, there are different chairs, there are different different tables. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is, and I, I may not be doing justice to his view, and I think you should ask him more about this. But I think he thinks that it's important in order to be a unified. So I think we were discussing what makes for a unified inner perspective, right? So we don't feel like billions of individual brain cells. I mean, I have no idea. Well, we kind of do, because that's what it feels like to be billions of individuals of neurons. That's really what it feels like. But we do feel, at least most of us, most of the time, feel like some kind of unified, centralized inner perspective. And so we were talking about how that comes about. And I think he felt that having that in the physical universe is importantly related to arising from a single origin. So he sees the egg as a single point of origin, and arising from that, that's how you are a separate individual from others. And I see it as much more fluid, and I see the boundary between self and world as something that can change all the time. I think it changes in embryogenesis, and that's the story of the scaling of the cognitive light cone that we talked about. I think it can shrink during cancer. I think it can change during metamorphosis, during maturation. I think it's much more fluid than that.
Now, as we're on speculative ground, if what makes an agent is the distinction between the self and the world, and some people think of God as the entirety of everything, thus the entire world, and there's no distinction, then can one say that God is an agent?
I don't know. I mean, certainly, I think most religions that have a God, anyway, as far as my understanding is, they would think that yes, the God has extreme agency, in fact, higher than ours. I don't know what that really buys us, in any helpful way.
Remove the word God. Does the world have agency?
Okay, so that's an interesting question. So let's start with, first of all, how do we know when anything has agency? And that's an experimental research program. So you hypothesize what problem space it's working in, what you think its goals are, and then you do experiments to figure out what competency it has. And then you find out, did I guess well, poorly? Do I need to make a better guess, and so on? So for example, people have said to me, well, your kind of pansychist almost view says that the weather should be cognitive. And I say, I don't say that it is or isn't, because we haven't done the experiments. Do I know that weather systems, let's say hurricanes or so on, do I know that they don't show habituation, sensitization, that they couldn't be trained if you had the right scale of machinery? I have no idea. But what I do know is that it's not this is not a philosophical thing that we can decide arguing in an armchair. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. No, you have to do experiments, and then you find out. So now the question is, okay, so what about the galaxy? What about the universe? Right? Are these the Gaia ecosystems? Again, I think these are all empirical questions. Now, some of them are intractable. We don't have the capability to do experiments on a planetary scale. But for example, one thing that I did try to do once was design a gravitational synapse. So design a solar system sized arrangement where masses would fly in, and based on the history of masses flying in, it would respond to new masses in a different way. So you can do, historicity, and you can have habituation and sensitization and things like that. So could you have something like that that would be very sort of ponderously, slowly, on an enormous scale, computing something and having, sort of simple thoughts? I bet you could. I bet you could.
He's not exactly right here. Because these kind of experiments do exist, and there's two things I'd like to point out. One of them is that the reason that people have failed to detect God, in my opinion, is that they do not understand the parameters that even say that there is a God has to work within. And this is something that all of the major magical traditions that I feel have actual competency acknowledge. And it is that not even say that, let's just for the sake of argument, devil's advocate here, or the opposite. Let's say that there is some sort of creator, and it has constrained its mind to be the rules and the laws of the universe, and they are non-negotiable once they have been established. And so people go about, praying for things that are not possible, or, trying to provoke God to make some kind of demonstration of its existence, and they fail because that's not possible. It's not within the realm of possibility relative to our position in this universe. And so that's why we cannot design experiments really to prove these things in a repeatable, testable, controlled environment type of scenario, which is what science generally demands of it, or at least we haven't been able to yet. I did predict a few years ago that as the universe awakens, because this is a process that is happening both on micro and macro, or it wouldn't be happening at all, that we would start to experience synchronicities on a collective level. And the other day I heard about I saw a picture, the dildo-shaped iceberg floating through Conception Bay, heading for Spread Eagle, Canada. So that sort of thing. There have been a couple of other ones that were like off the wall, ridiculous, like that. But that was the most recent one. The other thing is that he says I don't know how we could make experiments that show that the weather is sentient. But I once arrived at a ritual with a Hawaiian shaman. And at the peak of it, he said, "May the wind blow to confirm the power of our prayers." And the wind blew so hard that gravel was blown across the parking lot. And I have to acknowledge the possibility of coincidence. But I think that even the most hardened skeptic's jaw would have been on the ground. I mean, it was so intense and obviously real that it was almost traumatizing for every single person in that circle, because they were all, I was the weirdest one. They were school teachers and just relatively normal people. No one knew that this was coming. And I also would point out that there have been records throughout the history of anthropology, particularly in North and South America, records of anthropologists observing Native Americans and indigenous people boiling water without a heat source and all sorts of things along those lines. I also witnessed a rain dance that apparently actually worked, except that I was inside, but it was a rain dance, and I think that's why we went inside to do it. Chief Golden Light Eagle, R.I.P. He was a Sioux Sundance chief, and I think he was a very funny and clever man, and he thought, well, if we're doing a rain dance and there's a building nearby, we should do it inside. And so we did it, and then it was bone dry outside. When we came outside, the crazy part about it is that the sky was completely clear, but there were puddles, all huge puddles. It obviously just dumped, but only it was clear when we went inside. It was about 2 hours, and then when we came out, everything was soaked, but the clouds were already gone. So again, it could be just an astronomically improbable coincidence, but I'm not sure that it's true that we don't have experiments that can demonstrate some sort of sentience or relationship between our consciousness and the weather. In fact, there are surprisingly convincing stories from Grateful Dead concerts of the band coming out and it's pouring rain in the monsoon season in Las Vegas. And they go into Here Comes Sunshine, the rain stops, and they leave 3 days later, and as soon as the last note from the band played, the sky cracked open and poured. There's another example of Divided Sky by Fish, where the clouds split right down the middle of Red Rocks, and it's storming on both sides. The band goes into Divided Sky before this happens. And the idea, and then there's one with Widespread Panic, where they start singing this rainbow song and a rainbow forms behind Red Rocks. Now, I've seen innumerable examples of this, and the idea is that maybe even supported by the fact that these people, a lot of them are on psychedelics, and so they have that reduced filtration system between their consciousness and the electromagnetic field. Between the magnetite in their brain and the field that they're communicating with in order to influence the weather, that there's so many people and their attention, their expectations are brought to the same place by the themes of these songs, and the weather responds. So actually the most recent one you guys can go and check out that was remarkable. When the Grateful Dead did their 50th anniversary shows in Santa Clara, where it does not rain in the Bay Area in June, and there was a storm cloud only above the stage, and the symbol of Garcia's soul since he died is a rainbow, and it was also Gay Pride Day. And Bob Weir sings, "The rainbows spiral round around and tremble then explode." As he said this, a double rainbow forms behind the stage. It was so insane that Billboard magazine accused them of faking it. And they called the lighting company. And the lighting company said, "Oh yeah, we put 500,000 LEDs in the sky." They were being sarcastic. And so Billboard magazine printed this as a stunt. And the production company called them back and said, "Are you stupid? There's no way to do that. There's no way to do that. Like, how could you possibly have believed we were serious?" And so they retracted the article, and the new article actually said, "Maybe the Grateful Dead does actually jam with God," was the title. So let's keep going. Actually, let me check in with the chat, make sure I haven't lost any of my... all right, looks like we're good. Where can you find more info about what? CERN is trying to replace the OG God with their God, so yeah. Sure, they are. I think CERN is just trying to figure shit out the way that physicists figure shit out. I don't really buy it. That, you know, there's some weird Illuminati shit going on with CERN. It'd be a lot cooler if there was, though.
Is the real universe doing that? I have no idea. We have to do experiments. So you know, here you bump up against another question, which is, how do you know if and when you are part of a larger cognitive system, right? So
Now,
I don't, you know, how do we know if
out.
we are in fact part of a bigger mind? So I don't know. My suspicion is that there's some sort of Gödel-like theorem that will tell you that you can never know for sure, and you can never be certain. But I bet that you could gather evidence for it, well, for or against. And I often think about a kind of a you know, kind of a mental image. Just imagine two neurons in the brain, and one is a you know, kind of a strict materialist, and one's a little more mystical. And the one neuron says, look, you know, we just run on chemistry, and the outside world is a cold mechanical universe, and it doesn't care what we do. There's no mind outside of us. And the other one says, can't prove it, but I kind of feel like there's an order to things, and I kind of feel like our environment is not stupid. I kind of feel like our environment wants things from us, and I kind of feel these waves of you know, these waves back propagating through us that are like almost rewards and punishments. I feel like the universe is trying to tell us something, and the first one says, you're just seeing, you know, faces in clouds. It doesn't exist. And of course, in my example, the second one is correct, because they are in fact part of a larger system. They're part of a brain that is learning things, and it's very hard for any one node in that system to recognize that, or even a sub network. But I wonder if we could, having a, you know, a degree of intelligence ourselves, if we could gain evidence that we were part of a larger system that was actually processing information. And I don't know exactly what that would look like, but my hunch is that it would look like what we call synchronicity. I think that what it would look like are coincidences, are events that don't have a causal connection at our lower level, like mechanistically, like by physics. There's no reason why that should be, but at a larger scale in terms of meaning and you know, the greater meanings of things, that they do have some kind of interpretation. And I think that's what it would look like to be part of a larger system. I think it would look and feel like synchronicity. So does it exist? I don't know, but that's what I think it would feel like.
If you enjoyed this Toe clipping, then the full video is linked in the description. You should also sign up for Toe.
Yeah, you should. And this is, the people ask me sometimes who I follow. I don't really follow this channel a lot, but when I do watch stuff on YouTube, I think it's almost always on this channel. He's kind of on a similar mission, but leaning in the other direction, you know, whereas a little bit more like fundamentally, well, you know, over time, as the scientists seem to have kind of been turning pansychist on us, it's increasingly mystical, you know, and that's a wonderful thing, because in my opinion, you know, it's been an absolute tragedy that we have a lot of us really sort of justified the materialist and atheist position by not really taking responsibility for cultivating our capacities as mystics and magicians and people that think out of the box in general. And it's not really the fault of people. It's the fact that, you know, we don't have an accessible mystery tradition. We do, but people have been scared away from them, and I wonder why that would be, you know. But for example, in a place like ancient Greece, where you had a much smaller population, you know, everyone knew about the mysteries, and if you wanted to become acquainted with the deeper realities of the universe and learn how to see things as they are rather than as you think they are, you could just go and attempt to take initiation. And unless there was something fundamentally wrong with you, like your IQ was far too low, or you were evil, or, you know, some sort of thing like that, then you could find this guidance and assistance. And I think in our society, clearly there has been a concerted effort to discourage people from pursuing legitimate lineages of spiritual knowledge, and instead they're encouraged to adopt prefabricated religions that are actually designed to prevent that sort of gnosis from occurring. Okay, so now we're going to get into kind of the physical basis for a lot of this stuff. And of course, light is absolutely fundamental to everything. And some of those mysteries have been revealed over the last couple of years. I say this all the time, but if you don't follow Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose and their Orc theory of consciousness, it's probably a good idea to do so if you're interested in this kind of stuff. Again, while I'm on the subject, and because we're getting into symmetries here, I want to point out that these symmetries, the evidence that they permeate all systems, right? This is what I've been saying about synchronicity for, decades, that it's about creating a homeostasis internally, and that's reflected externally. And it blew my mind because I was searching for a terminology to use to describe, and supersymmetry it's not really good to appropriate terms and then misuse them, and that's not what supersymmetry is. So I decided on higher orders of symmetry. And about a month ago, I found a quote from Jung that was saying that there are higher orders of symmetry that exist in the universe that are responsible for our experience of synchronicity. And I was like, damn, that's crazy. That's the same exact language that I chose to describe this. And further, lately I've been talking about how there has been this emergent understanding of the relationship between light and consciousness, just as the sun is exploding in all of these solar storms and so on and so forth. There are revolutionary processes, which is throughout the universe a matter of the excitation of light, basically. But what I'm getting at here is that across the board right now, you have these fundamental fluctuations in all the systems that we're observing. And these revelations of light coming from ancient knowledge and also our understanding of consciousness correlating with the sun, you see. So these higher orders of symmetry permeate everything, which was one of the points of this. It's something I talk about quite a lot on this channel. So when I found this next little bit and realized that this is a fundamental truth that applies to everything on the tiniest micro scale all the way to the grandest. And this is where you actually get into the reality that this is how real magicians operate. This is how you develop legitimate precognition, and this is how you anticipate where there are going to be problems and where there are going to be opportunities in your universe by learning to observe certain aspects of any system, really, because they all inform you of developments and potentials in any other area when you learn to see with the proper kind of eye.
How on earth did everything we see come out of a point? And the key, I believe, is a certain symmetry in the laws of physics we already know. Namely, the laws of those forces of nature, one of which is electromagnetic forces, the light, the laws of light and electric and magnetic fields, and the laws of particle physics we know, which were written down by Dirac, the Dirac equation. Those two theories happen to have a symmetry under rescaling space. So this is actually the reason why a light wave is essentially the same as an X-ray. An X-ray is just a scaled down version of a light wave. You just shrink the length scale, shrink the wavelength of the light, and you'll get an X-ray. Expand the wavelength of the light, and you'll get a radio wave. Light is essentially the same thing, scaled up and down. It can come in all forms. They all obey the same equation. They just have longer or shorter. It's uniquely specified by the wavelength. And the reason that is possible, the reason the theory behaves like that, it has a symmetry, and the symmetry is scaling symmetry, rescaling length and time, and you get shorter or longer wavelength, higher frequency or lower frequency light. Now, Dirac's equation has the same property, as long as you ignore the masses of the particles.
Right.
So, in other words, when these equations are taken to the massless limit, and the Big Bang is exactly such a place because the plasma is extremely hot, so masses are irrelevant there. And so it's very tempting to believe that at the Big Bang singularity, essentially there was nothing but light and light-like particles, and they all have this scaling symmetry. Now, that scaling symmetry is very deep, very profound, and what it's telling us in sort of colloquial terms is that the matter did not know about the size of the universe. It evolves in such a way that it doesn't care that the universe is shrinking as we go back in time. And so the matter is evolving as if the universe were in fact not shrinking to a point, or can be described mathematically with ignoring the shrinking away of the universe. And
Okay, and part of that shrinking away of the universe is the idea that the process is actually systole and diastole. It's expansion and contraction. So, and this is something that exists in several different schools of mysticism. The Pythagorean Illuminati frame it as basically the alpha and omega phases, that there are, the universe is basically a dynamic net zero that is in a state of fluctuation. And so this shrinking away of the universe is the retraction phase, or the diastole, systole and diastole. Yeah, so there was something else that this, oh my gosh, I've forgotten.
is evolving as if the universe were in fact not shrinking to a point, or can be described.
So he said something really important there. This idea that there are these higher orders of symmetry that permeate all of the systems in the universe and connect the way that they relate to each other. The fact that light has this symmetry as such a fundamental property, and that the scaling of the light changes its function, but it's still fundamentally the same thing. If you extrapolate from that, the understanding that that matter is all light in a standing wave, and then you see that if light is all there is to understand the properties and behaviors of all of the systems in the universe, understanding light is the central key. And in this way, you don't really have to learn about all of these different systems in order to know about them. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I feel like I've demonstrated that, because that's basically what I did, to come to an understanding of these things before I actually really learned about them, or that they've been confirmed. Yeah, I mean, and again, it's not like it's my protocol. This is the ancient mystery protocol. This is how Pythagoras thought. This is how people were taught to think in the Eleusinian mysteries and Freemasonry, and I'm sure lots of systems that I am totally unaware of. But as above, so below is the probably most succinct expression of this sort of stuff that I'm aware of. So let me check in with the chat again and make sure that we're on track here. Agrippa and Mr. Crowley. That is facts. Okay, let's jump back into the video. I just wanted to make sure that my microphone had not died, or so.
It's mathematically with ignoring the shrinking away of the universe. And this is what we noticed about the Einstein equations and the laws of radiation. They have that the Big Bang singularity is a very particular type of singularity called a conformal singularity. Conformal, and I'll tell you a little bit more about conformal. Conformal symmetry, this is a picture which sort of illustrates this. So light and particles are described as gauge fields and fermions in the Standard Model, a la Maxwell and Dirac. Now conformal symmetry is a symmetry of light and massless particles. Conformal symmetry means that you can actually rescale space and time locally, and the equations are invariant. So here's an example. Imagine I was solving Maxwell's equations inside a cylinder. So the boundary of the cylinder was a circle, as the left picture shows. Alternatively, imagine I was solving Maxwell's equations inside a square pipe. Okay, so the cross-section was a square. Conformal symmetry tells you those two situations are actually identical as far as the light is concerned. And often, so the grid you see on the right, that's just a coordinate grid. It's useful for writing down equations or putting them on a computer, but has no particular physical significance. Now, if I distort the square on the right into the disk on the left with a conformal transformation, that means a local change of scale, which does not change angles, it only changes lengths. I get the picture on the left. So that's another grid. I could solve the Maxwell's equations on that grid. And then the statement of conformal symmetry is that these two things give exactly the same result. So these funny points where you see this pileup of grid points in the left-hand picture, they're a little bit like the Big Bang singularity.
I almost hate to interrupt right there, but I almost want to go back and play that again in case anyone missed like the real depth of what was being said there and how it corresponds to what I was describing before in terms of the as above, so below symmetries, and the fact that, when you scale space and time locally, I think is how we put it, the equations remain invariant. And also that as far as the light is concerned, there's one thing doing one thing. And if you've been following the channel for, a while, you've heard that innumerable times. So it's really remarkable for me to be seeing this because up until now, almost, I've had to, I knew that these observations correlated between every system that I observed. And that's how I knew, and then that is what scientific illuminism really is. That's what I'm really trying to get across here is that, you are a mystic, but you are operating with the same protocol as scientists do, but within the parameters that are available to you, which are a little bit different. But the fundamental process is still the same, even down to the point of peer review. Because one of the things that we'll do is notice, like, shamans in South America, or even better example is the Freemasons or the mystery lineages, say that a sorcerer or a self-serving magician is turning to the left, and in the jungles of Borneo, the evil sorcerer is turning to the left, and the healer is turning to the right, the left and right-hand path. In fact, there's a coca leaf. It's like symbolism. It's not really for divination or anything, but the three coca leaves basically, in one context, represent the pillar on the left, Jachin and Boaz, and the person in the middle is the mediating magician. So we have three pillars in the Western mystery tradition. There are coca leaves here, but they symbolize the same thing. So that's the peer review thing. Even more ubiquitous. We're actually looking at it, the circle and the square, right? And every single ritual that I know of, every tradition, from Druid to Ayahuasquero to, the Western Mystery Temple, you are first casting a circle, defining a circle that is the microcosm, the magician or shaman or whatever it is, has control over and is, organizing and mediating the energies from outside with the geometry of it. And it is a direct reflection of the universe at large. And you are becoming the microcosmic God of that circle. And the next step, invariably, and if you even look at the circle on the left, you'll see 4 dots of concentrated light. Those are the 4 fundamental forces of physics. Those are the 4 archangels. Those are the 4 directions. Those are the 4 elements. But it doesn't matter what tradition you're talking about. There's always, after the circle, an acknowledgement of those 4 points in some context or in multiple contexts simultaneously. So we even have the peer review system. That when you're talking about someone who's coming from a mystery lineage, that's another part of the process, basically, is to look for disparate systems that have the same contingencies and protocol, and then you give that more weight as a potentially valid constituent of theory and practice.
Right? There's a sort of pileup of space into a point. And what it's saying is you just have to blow that up with a conformal transformation, just expand your grid, and the equations are just the same in the new picture. So we actually use this picture to make sense of the Big Bang singularity. So we go back to the Big Bang singularity. Now imagine blowing up that singularity. I don't mean in the sense of explosion. I mean in a mathematical sense, like changing the scale of space. So one can do this mathematically. And then the singularity actually becomes a finite. It's not a point. It's now a finite patch. And then we impose a boundary condition on that patch, which implements mirror symmetry.
Mirror symmetry. Now, remember how I was talking about there's a veil between worlds where, and I think also time reverses on either side of this. You know, this voice in my head, remember the veil we told you about, and I'm doing a solar ritual, and what is your name backwards? Yel-Ra? You know, I'm Yel-Ra, the Egyptian sun god. You know what I mean? Like, how could I even thought to have made that up on the spot? But this is that on a physical level. And as far as the mirror hypothesis goes, my vision of the universe, I think it all came to me at once. I don't know why. I think I was just like sitting somewhere. I wasn't even, tripping, or just all of a sudden just sitting there, maybe meditating, had my eyes closed. And I saw something that looked like a spermatozoa made of light, which I now realize was probably a solitary photon, and it pierced through space-time, the fabric of space-time, in the way that a spermatozoa would an egg. And that basically catalyzed the process of creation, where everything was created by replication, by reflection. And so what he's talking about is how all the light has made everything, and the symmetry is a property of the light. And so once the thing started to repeat by reflection, everything contained the blueprint of the original thing. And so the process was that this replication by reflection continued until there were no possibilities left, that the universe, all of the potentials that were available to it without overriding any of the laws of the universe, the process reversed, and the light collapsed in on itself. And it's because of the collapsing, the compression into a tiny, 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 tiny point. At a certain point, it becomes too much, and the pressure reverses, and we have another Big Bang. And this just repeats infinitely. And so there are two elements to this. The one is that on a sort of like subjective level, from the point of view of the creator, or this intelligence that, this fundamental intelligence that existed in the beginning, which, by the way, develops in step with its creation. Instead of being all omnipotent and powerful, it's a cooperative developmental process between this intelligence and its creation. And so what disrupted the nothingness, according to this, I guess, creation mythos, is that it realized it was there, which is like what? Looking in a mirror. And also, remember this reflection by replication, or replication by reflection description. I heard one physicist describe this quantum loop theory in the mirror universe is that the best way they could put it in layman's terms is that a pre-existing state reflected itself, which is exactly like something suddenly realizing it was there. And then that caused the process which catalyzed the universe as we know it.
So that initial patch at the Big Bang, we treat as if it were a mirror. So normally when we deal with, let's say, Maxwell's equations in a mirror, the propagation of light in the presence of a mirror, there are two ways to do it. Either you impose a boundary condition at the mirror, you say that the electric field parallel to the mirror has to be 0, and you literally solve the equations showing how the light travels to the mirror, bounces off the mirror, and comes back. That's one way of doing it. It's actually a rather tedious way of doing it. There's a much nicer way of doing it, which is to say, look, I'm looking at myself in the mirror. Let me make if I'm right-handed, let me make a left-handed version of myself, put that behind the mirror. Okay.
Yes.
So it's a fictitious person. That's literally a mirror image of me. Put it behind the mirror, an equal distance from the mirror. Throw the mirror away, and just solve Maxwell's equations for the light coming from that person to me. That's called the method of images in physics. It's a very elegant way of solving boundary value problems. And what we're claiming is that you can apply the same method to describe the Big Bang. The Big Bang is a mirror. So I literally take the post-Bang universe, make an image of it before the Big Bang, and then I would just propagate light and particles from that pre-Bang universe through the Big Bang singularity. Because of conformal symmetry, that propagation is completely smooth and regular and predictable, and I propagate that forward to see what we see. So we claim that this extended or mirror universe picture is absolutely compatible with everything we see in the universe. So in a certain sense, when we look back towards the Big Bang, we are seeing our own image. Okay, that the Big Bang is a boundary condition. It's not, you shouldn't think about, you see, the conventional way about thinking about the Big Bang, which I think leads to terrible paradoxes, is that somebody input all the stuff in the universe at the Big Bang and sort of threw it apart.
Right.
What we're doing is the opposite of that. We're saying, no, the Big Bang, all that happens in the Big Bang is a boundary condition, which the matter has to respect.
If you look at this,
Yes.
the traditional way is that someone or something just spurred everything into existence from that single point. But
Exactly.
then you're saying that this is an improved picture.
Yes.
However, it just looks like someone or something spurred all from at all points at once. So it doesn't seem like much of an improvement. So tell me why this is different.
Right. No, good question. You might say, our picture looks like somebody made two universes, so surely it's
Yes.
twice as difficult. Yes. No, good point. What we're saying is that there is a, yeah, in fact, the answer is this.
Great. Natural lead up.
Yes, the answer is this. So the most fundamental law of physics we know, which is a direct consequence of quantum mechanics and relativity, is called CPT symmetry. CPT symmetry was discovered in the 30s and 40s as an inevitable consequence of bringing quantum mechanics and relativity together. So it underlies quantum field theory. Now, what is CPT symmetry? CPT symmetry says the following, that if I look at some physical process and I try to make another physical process using a law of symmetry, okay? So take some physical process, turn every particle into its antiparticle. That's what the C does. P invert space. So literally just send any space coordinate in three-dimensional space to its inverse. X goes to minus X. Okay, that's an inversion of space. That's a very dramatic thing to do, but the laws, you can do this with the laws of physics. T is time reversal. So whatever's going forward in time, make it go backwards in time. The CPT theorem in relativistic quantum physics tells you that the rate for any process and its CPT conjugate process is identical. Okay, so this is kind of analogous to time reversal in Newtonian mechanics.
Okay, but not only that, it is, again, I need to check in with the chat. Again, it is here. Let me actually read some of the chat and see. Tracing back the shrinking, can we locate the point of origin of the universe? Relative to what? That's the problem with that. Relative to what? The point of origin relative to what? Because as soon as you start shrinking and scaling back, the only thing you would have to scale it to would be the edges of the universe. So sort of, but only like relative to the, what do they call that? And it's not the event horizon, but it's like we can only observe the light to like a certain extent. And that's why we really don't know exactly how big the universe is. By the way, you guys, hit the like button, share, subscribe. Consider joining my Patreon. And in fact, I am going to shout out our most recent patron, although I don't know. I guess it's fine. Mika Kainu, I want to thank you for becoming a patron. And patrons get access to 5 years of secret streams, mostly along topics like this and Freemasonry and the lineage and shamanism and all sorts of different things. And then also we have voice chats, sometimes 1 or 2 times a week, with groups of patrons. And also we still have a few spots in our August and September retreat. So we're very small groups, so if you're interested in that, don't hesitate to reach out before it is too late. All right, so equal and opposite reaction, okay? And this is what I'm saying about these absolute symmetries and how everything applies to everything, and everything contains its contradiction. Everything is balanced by antinomies. A friend of mine, not really a friend anymore, actually, because he just got so woo-centric. And in an ego-inflated way, I think he was kind of like trying to outdo by, just, I don't know, it doesn't matter. Shouldn't get into all that stuff, but, he was insisting that the universe is out of balance, and that's why we have all this evil. And my argument was that there is not a single particle, no matter how small in the entire universe, it doesn't have exactly an anti-corollary, and that's why we have all this evil, because it's necessary. It's necessary. Everything in the universe is necessary. Nothing exists that isn't necessary. within the context of existence, right? And so I feel like there was some other. No, that's good enough. That's good enough. Let's keep going.
Newtonian mechanics, you can take the laws of motion and reverse time, and because they're second order equations in time, they are invariant. So Newtonian mechanics has no arrow of time, and in relativity, the generalization is CPT. So we take our observed universe, the right-hand part of this picture. It has more matter than antimatter. Okay, so it is not invariant under C, and it's not invariant under T. It's going one way in time, and so the right-hand side of this picture violates CPT. But if you apply CPT to the right-hand side of the universe, what you get is the left-hand side. Namely, every particle goes to its antiparticle. What was going forwards in time, moving to the right in the right-hand part of the picture, is now going forwards in time, moving to the left in the left-hand part of the picture. And so the statement is that if you want the universe to respect the laws of physics in the most obvious way, namely that it is invariant under CPT, then you are led to this doubled picture. And in the doubled picture, there is then a very natural boundary condition, which is symmetrical under CPT. And the boundary condition is the one that we use. So we're saying the Big Bang is a CPT mirror. And this resolves the fundamental puzzle of why the universe appears to us to violate its own laws. We see more matter than antimatter, and that looks like the universe is not invariant under C. Likewise, we see time going one way, and that's incompatible with the fact that the laws of physics are invariant under reversing time.
Do you guys understand that what he's saying, what I just said, that, my issue with my friend is that no, it's all completely balanced. And so here's this physicist basically trying to reconcile the same problem I would have as a mystic. That if everything is in perfectly equal balance of opposites, why is there more matter than antimatter? And why is time only going in one direction? Because it should also be going backwards. And all these sort of things, equal and opposite reaction, everything contains this content. You know what I mean? All of these rules that fulfill our prerequisites to sort of verify our understanding are the same. In fact, 200 years ago, talking about exactly all the same stuff, but well before physics, not quite 200 years ago, Aleister Crowley said, "Science is always discovering little scraps of magical knowledge and making a great fuss about its cleverness." And now here you have proof of that.
And changing matter to antimatter. So what we're doing here is an extremely minimal application of CPT to the universe. And the consequence is this mirror universe hypothesis. So to put it differently, anyone who makes any other hypothesis is going to have to violate CPT. And that's a losing battle. So we were very surprised.
So in Newtonian mechanics, if you take a ball and there's no friction and you drop it,
right,
it hits and then it comes right back up.
Exactly.
Okay, now if you were to look locally, if you were to just look at half a second, you would say, well, look, there is a difference between the future and the past, because in the past it starts to go down, but in the future it starts to go up. But you're saying, well, you have to look at the whole picture.
Of course.
So let's take the full movie.
Of course.
Okay, so now, philosophically speaking, we used that word earlier.
Sure.
What is someone who's watching this supposed to feel? There's some religions that say something or someone, or the universe started itself and you experience this world once.
Right.
Then there are some other traditions that say you experience it cyclically, infinitely.
Right.
And then there's here, which seems to suggest, well, you experience everything twice.
No, because you see, when I say we're using the method of images to impose a boundary condition at the Big Bang. So this picture is a mathematical picture, a device, which is useful in order to impose a particular boundary at the Big Bang. So in this picture, the universe, in a certain sense, creates itself. Okay, it's extremely minimal. Everything I describe could be described by just taking the right half of the picture with this boundary condition, which is in effect the result of doubling it and imposing the symmetry. You see, if I double it and impose a symmetry, the doubling goes away, right? Because the left and right halves are identical.
So then, to be specific, is it correct to say the Big Bang is a mirror?
Yes,
or that for mathematical convenience, it's useful to model the Big Bang as a mirror? Like, is that the more elaborate correct statement?
No.
Or the Big Bang is a mirror is the correct statement?
Correct statement is the Big Bang is a mirror. And for any mirror, it is useful to double the universe.
I see.
Yeah, the doubling is just a mathematical trick, which you can use for any mirror. And we're saying that literally the Big Bang is a mirror. So I would say that this, I mean, certainly in my experience, and I worked with Stephen Hawking and I've worked with a number of other such people on scenarios for cosmology, there is no doubt this is the most economical hypothesis you can make. Because it's compatible with the laws of physics and extremely minimal. So, either it's right or it's wrong. We'll see. That's the attractive feature of this whole setup, is that it is eminently disprovable. And that makes it interesting. So, as I mentioned, these laws, the particles and forces, actually do have this symmetry under local changes of scale. And that allows us to resolve the Big Bang singularity, to blow up the point everything came from into a patch. And then that patch is the mirror at the Big Bang. This is actually all the particles we know. Now, notice something funny about this picture. All right, so the neutrinos in the bottom left have a superscript L, okay, meaning that they are left-handed. If they are traveling along in the direction of the thumb of your left hand, the spin follows the fingers of your left hand. So it's rather strange that the light neutrinos we see only come in the left-handed variety. All the other particles have a right-handed and a left-handed version. Now, so that is, what we see in laboratory experiments. We only ever see left-handed neutrinos. However, if we were to imagine the simplest or the most minimal conceivable extension of the standard laws of physics, what would it be? And I just made it, right? I went from this slide to that slide by removing the L, okay? Now, all the particles have both left and right-handed versions, okay? And our claim, this is with Latham Boyle, our claim is that removing that L, in other words, giving the neutrinos a right-handed as well as a left-handed version, allows you to solve the problem of dark matter, okay, in an extremely minimal way with the mirror hypothesis. So now imagine these are the laws of physics. There's no L anymore on any particle. Every particle has left and right versions. Now what happens is I take my left-handed neutrino, it's coming in from the left. It then, we say that it can oscillate into a right-handed neutrino, the new right in the middle, and oscillate back into a left-handed neutrino on the right. Now, the left-handed neutrinos are very light. Neutrinos are very light particles. They don't have much mass. Mm-hmm. If the right-handed neutrino is very heavy, then this process can only be a virtual process. You have a certain amount of energy. You can't stay as a right-handed neutrino. You just don't have enough energy to account for its mass. So you've got to go back to being a left-handed neutrino. So this is what we call neutrino oscillations. That the left-handed neutrinos can oscillate briefly into a right-handed neutrino, and then they find themselves in, if you like, they've got more mass than they can account for with their energy, and so they go back into being a left-handed neutrino. This mechanism is a mechanism for giving the left-handed neutrinos a small mass. And neutrino masses started to be measured in the 1970s. And this mechanism was quickly realized as the simplest explanation for those masses. Namely, if there are right-handed neutrinos, which are very heavy, this would explain why the left-handed neutrinos are very light. You see, the heavier the right-handed neutrino, the shorter the time you're going to spend as a right-handed neutrino. And so basically, the heavier you make it, the less and less probable it is that the neutrino oscillates in this way. And so it's called the seesaw.
Now, what is occurring to me in this moment is that if there wasn't this bias from these scientists, and it sounds arrogant enough that I hate to say it, and it's not even on behalf of myself, but just on behalf of everyone that, has this approach to thinking about these things, we could have helped them save so much time and work if they weren't so dismissive and condescending. And granted, there are so many people that, because we don't have accredited universities to help them distinguish between those of us that are just muddle-headed mystics with wind blowing through our ears, I do forgive them to an extent. But it is true that much of what they are taking credit for and so excited about right now is stuff that the certain schools of mysticism have understood and known and even could have explained to them probably 2,000 years ago. So in a sense, the entirety of physics has been a tremendous waste of time, except that, and I'm almost embarrassed that this is just occurring to me, things develop in equal and opposite tracks and velocities and trajectories, right? So this guy is the right-handed neutron and I'm the left-handed neutron or something. You know what I mean? It's and it makes sense that even though it's not as visible, because most people that are mystics that actually are adept, they're very quiet about this stuff. They're hermits. They're hermetically sealed with vows of silence. And I happen to have rejected 2 of those vows, and so I'm not really bound to that. And a lot of us have decided that time is over, anyways, and has been for a long time. So I guess what I'm saying is that also, in a way, I suspect that the mystical understanding has been quietly developing perfectly in step with the advances in physics, because these are sort of like the left-handed and right-handed versions of neutrinos, of these particles that may or may not make up photons, where they have the sun is just constantly raining them down upon us. There are trillions of them, I think, passing through your body every second, at least billions. So it's a pretty remarkable thing. Some other bit of this just kind of like passed through my head and then escaped before I could grab a hold of it. But it really is a tremendous thing to witness. I'm even the first time I was watching this, I don't think quite all of it really sunk in exactly what I was hearing. So a little bit shell-shocked at the moment.
Mechanism, because the heavier you make the right-handed neutrino, the lighter the mass of the left-handed neutrino. So this was understood in the 70s.
Oh, that's what it was. In fact, to quote Aleister Crowley again, he said that magic is the most subtle and difficult branch of physics.
At that time, people could have said, oh, well, maybe the dark matter is a right-handed neutrino. You see, the right-handed neutrino is a very obvious candidate because it has no electromagnetic charge. It doesn't couple to the strong or the weak force at all. So the only thing the right-handed neutrino couples to is the Higgs field, this thing noted by H, and gravity. So for the right-handed neutrino to be the dark matter, all you need do is A, switch off this coupling. Okay, so actually this is the important one. You don't want, so for the right-handed neutrino to be the dark matter, the only problem is that it can decay. This diagram shows a right-handed neutrino decaying into a Higgs and a left-handed neutrino. So if you want the dark matter to be stable, it has to have survived for at least 14 billion years, you've got to switch off this vertex. And if you switch off that vertex, you must switch off this vertex because they're the same vertex. And if you do that, it means the left-handed neutrino cannot oscillate into the right-handed neutrino. And this actually means the left-handed guy must be massless. So just from this picture, you can see that if the dark matter is stable and consists of right-handed neutrinos, then it's plausible that one of the left-handed neutrinos is massless. And that's actually our prediction, which is going to be tested in the next 5 years. So now the second thing you've got to do is you've actually got to make these right-handed neutrinos, right? How do they get made? And the way they get made is rather beautiful. You see, if I switch off this vertex, there are actually 3 of these right-handed neutrinos and 3 vertices, so I'm somewhat simplifying the story. But if I take one of them and I switch off its vertex, then it actually doesn't couple to anything except gravity. So this poor right-handed neutrino is sitting there in the universe. It doesn't see the hot plasma at all. And the mystery is, how did it get created? What determines its abundance? And so this was actually our first starting point with this whole picture. We realized the right-handed neutrinos are produced as Hawking radiation from the Big Bang. That it is simply the time dependence of the universe that creates these right-handed particles. It literally pulls them out of a vacuum, which is a process called Hawking radiation. It's due to gravity. It's due to their coupling to gravity and due to the fact that the universe is expanding. So what we showed is that if their mass was 500 million times the mass of a proton, then they account for all the dark matter we see. And this is the simplest yet explanation for the dark matter. It's just right-handed neutrinos. They were created by the expansion of the universe. To calculate that creation, we had to assume a particular quantum state for the right-handed neutrinos. And what we did is to use the state defined by CPT symmetry and the mirror hypothesis. Okay, so all of this is kind of self-consistent.
And is that a bound on the mass of the right-handed neutrino, or is that like an actual prediction for it?
It's an exact prediction. Okay,
Uh-huh.
That has to be its mass. Now, it's very hard to measure indirectly. I mean, you would have to literally have a little gravimeter and go through space and wait until a right-handed neutrino traveled past you and measure the deflection due to its mass. Okay, one day that'll be possible. It's not possible today. But no, this is a very precise prediction of its mass. There are no free parameters in that prediction. So if it's stable, the lightest neutrino is massless. Why? Because to make it stable, I had to switch off this vertex. And if I switch off this vertex, I have to switch off that one. And that means this left-handed neutrino cannot acquire a mass by becoming a virtual right-handed neutrino for a little while. So the prediction is that the lightest neutrino, namely one of these left-handed neutrinos, is exactly massless. And amazingly, this is now possible using the Euclid survey, satellite telescope survey, now underway. And basically what you do is measure the strength of clustering of galaxies, on a certain scale, which corresponds to the, let me start again. The way you measure neutrino masses using galaxy surveys, and it's quite extraordinary that you can do this, is by measuring the strength of the clustering of matter. Now, if the neutrinos are massless, they do not clump with the rest of the matter. If they have a mass, then as the universe expands, they actually slow down relative to the expansion, because the mass kind of becomes important and they no longer are moving at the speed of light. They slow down and they clump with the other matter. And that effect turns out to be large enough that by measuring the clustering of galaxies, you can measure the mass of the neutrino. And so they claim they will be able to check that the lightest neutrino is massless within about 5 sigma, quite accurately, using these forthcoming galaxy surveys within the next 5 years. So should this prediction be confirmed, my claim is that this will be easily the most compelling.
You can determine the mass of neutrinos by measuring galaxies. Who was Hermes Trismegistus? That's a question that comes to mind.
Explanation for the dark matter. There are other predictions. We can predict the decay rate of atomic nuclei, a process called neutrinoless double beta decay, but that process is very, very slow and may take 1 or 2 decades to measure. It's very, very tough experimental test. But if this one works out, there will be very strong motivation for doing nuclear physics experiments to check this idea that the dark matter is the right-handed neutrino. So where do we get to? Well, the Big Bang was a special type of singularity. The size of the universe is governed by what we call the scale factor. This comes into the metric on space-time. And what happens is that as time goes to 0, the scale factor, the size of the universe, shrinks to 0 in a very simple way, just linearly in time. When it hits 0, we call that a conformal 0. And
Meaning
that the scale shrinks to 0, the overall scale shrinks to 0. So colloquially, the universe is at a point. But as I mentioned, you can always blow up the scale, essentially by dividing by this quantity that goes to 0. You can blow it up, and that becomes the mirror. So this conformal 0 in this picture of the Big Bang becomes, in fact, an extended 3-dimensional mirror in what we call the conformal frame. So one way of saying it is that the conformal 4 geometry is actually regular at the Big Bang. So this is a resolution of the Big Bang singularity. The Big Bang is not the shrinking away the Big Bang is in a sense a shrinking away of space, but the thing is that the particles and forces are not affected by that shrinking. They're still obeying equations as if they were in extended 3-dimensional space. So this is a way of resolving the Big Bang singularity and turning it into a mirror.
It also explains why, if the systole and diastole expansion and contraction Phoenix process version of the universe, the quantum loop theory, as the physicists would call it, is correct, why once the energy is compressed in such a small space, it pushes back with such tremendous force, because all of the particles of energy that are contained within that have not changed.
So I was going to tell you about explaining the geometry of the universe, but I think that's too long. I want to talk a little bit about the most exciting and most recent development in this hypothesis. And so this is addressing the very fundamental dilemma which occurs in coupling quantum fields to gravity. Okay, so we know that in order to describe the laws of fundamental physics, we have to use quantum fields. This is an extremely successful technique, and it's the basis for the standard model. Everything is described by quantum fields in the standard model. However, these quantum fields look like the right-hand picture in the vacuum. And this is just a consequence of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. You might want to set a field to 0 and just say there's no electric or magnetic field in space. But this is inconsistent with quantum mechanics. Why? Because the magnetic field is like a coordinate of a particle, x, and the electric field is like the velocity of the particle, or its momentum. And the Heisenberg uncertainty principle says that either you measure x or you measure p. You can't measure both. You can't set the position of a particle to 0 and its momentum to 0 at the same time. You can do one or the other. And so what happens in the quantum vacuum, you might say, okay, let's have 0 electric field. But then you've got infinite magnetic field. You might say, okay, 0 magnetic field, but then you've got infinite electric field. So the compromise which happens in the vacuum is that neither the electric nor the magnetic fields are zero. They're both oscillating with what is called 0-point fluctuations.
Now, you guys heard me say I haven't watched this video this far. Earlier I was talking about how the Pythagorean Illuminati uses the terms dynamic net zero, and this idea that it's nothingness fluctuating between various states of nothingness. This is the whole, I mean, if you look at Aleister Crowley's The Book of Lies, so falsely called, in the introduction, I think he says, this book is a naughty knot of naughts. And it also, the full title is The Book of Lies, the Wanderings of the One Thought of Frater Perdurabo, which is in itself untrue, or breaks. The secret to understanding that book is this exact idea. And so now here we are, 1910, published in 1914, 110 years later, and
so the vacuum is full of these fluctuations, which are pictured in the right-hand side. And these are all the fields in the standard model: the electron fields, the photon fields, the strong force, the weak force. Everything is sort of going crazy in the vacuum. I say going crazy advisedly because there's infinite energy in these oscillations. This is a very deep paradox about trying to couple quantum fields to gravity. Now, not only do you get infinite energy in the vacuum, and as I mentioned, gravity detects all energy. And in particular, it's very hard to stop gravity feeling all this energy in the vacuum. So you're led to this immediate paradox that gravity doesn't, is coupling to an infinity. Cosmology doesn't really make any sense. So people cheat in various ways. They subtract that infinity in certain ways. But there's a further problem, which is that these 0-point fluctuations in the vacuum spoil this beautiful local scale symmetry of the Maxwell and Dirac theory, which we needed in order to make sense of the Big Bang singularity. So these vacuum fluctuations seem to prevent us describing the Big Bang singularity as a mirror. So what we have done recently, very recently, is we discovered an entirely new mechanism, A, for canceling the energy in the vacuum, B, for restoring the symmetry of Maxwell and Dirac, the local scale symmetry. And we found we could do that in a very unique way. We call them dimension zero fields. They're rather peculiar fields. They do not have any particles. They merely exist, if you like, in the vacuum. So all they do is sit there and cancel out these various diseases in the vacuum. Okay, so it's, again, extremely minimal addition to the standard model. It's very unique. Their properties are uniquely defined. And then rather miraculously, these same extra ingredient in the vacuum turns out to explain the origin of the density variations. And so this is now rather technical. I'm going to leap to a formula, which I'm not going to justify, but this formula is a direct consequence of the assumptions I've laid out. It says that the power spectrum in the early universe, that's this curly P thing, as a function of wavelength, is given by these numerical factors, which are just a consequence of relativity, quantum mechanics, quantum field theory. Various numbers here, C beta, this alpha Y, alpha 2, and alpha 3, are the strong, weak, and electromagnetic coupling constants as measured in the laboratory. Okay, so roughly speaking, you can say that this is given by the fine structure constant, but it's for the strong, weak, and electromagnetic forces. So sure. These numbers are all a consequence of the standard model, right? All these funny fractions, a direct consequence of the number of particles of various charges and types in the standard model. So these are all standard model. There's a number of effective degrees of freedom. This is basically the number of particles in the standard model. So these numbers are just, inescapable consequences of the standard model. This is the red tilt. You see, this power of the fluctuations as a function of wavelength is growing with wavelength, like lambda to this small power. And this small power turns out to be 0.04, which is what we observe in the cosmic microwave sky. Okay, so there is this rather magical formula that comes out of those assumptions. It turns out, and this may be a coincidence, but it's a very tempting one, turns out that this formula matches both the amplitude and the red tilt. So this number gives you roughly 10 to the minus 5. Within a factor of 2, it matches the observations. The red tilt it predicts is 0.042, using the CERN measurements of the strong coupling constant, and the observed number from the Planck satellite is 0.041. So this is very tantalizing. All I would say at this point is that I think very few cosmologists except us, are convinced by this yet. I'm going around, Latham's going around giving talks. People are challenging us in various ways. If only you could do the calculation this way or that way, or check this or check that, we might believe you. That's very important that we are checked and that we really present a full burn calculation to satisfy everyone. And there are various assumptions we've made. They are always the simplest conceivable assumption, but there are some assumptions in this result. If this turns out to be theoretically safe, no one points out a problem with it. If the observations, as they improve, confirm this scaling, extends to even smaller wavelengths, then this will be the explanation. Okay, and cosmology will be unified.
Now, there are proofs already in this theory that would not satisfy other physicists, but as a initiate, the response is obvious that the infinite vacuum, that this nothingness contains infinity, divide by zero. You know what I mean? And even if you look at the glyph of zero, where the subconscious gives us our symbols. There's a line that you could follow around and around forever and ever and ever, and it's infinite. And then there's nothingness in the center. And there, you can go on with that in various ways that are actually very counterintuitive. When you have one and you add nothing to it, it becomes a bigger number. And then when you do that again, it becomes 100. And you do it again and again and again, and the numbers just become larger and larger and larger, even though it makes really, in a way, no sense that you're adding nothing in order to amplify the magnitude of something. And yet that is exactly what this theory is demonstrating happens in the physical world. And they're running into a problem because they're like, well, fucking mathematics works that way, but physical matter shouldn't. Why not? I thought you guys said it was all made of math.
So just to close on this, what I put forward here is the prospect, at least, of an extremely unified picture. There is just the standard model and gravity, perhaps with a few little additions in the vacuum, but no extra particles, no extra forces. And maybe we are actually very close to understand all the physical laws governing the universe and how they describe the Big Bang itself. If this is true, there are many, many other consequences. It leads to a new picture of black holes, which resolves the black hole information paradox. It will lead to many other predictions because it's so constrained, this picture.
And it will lead to the simultaneous development of some mystic somewhere completely comprehending the metaphysics of the universe correctly.
And there's no wiggle room. I mean, either this picture is right or it's wrong. So we'll see. Here are some references of papers on this. There are other papers on the...
Jesus, man. That was even heavier than I was anticipating. And I imagine we probably lost some folks because it got pretty dense. But actually, you guys are hanging in there pretty well. That's pretty cool because I like to think that I have, smart people in my community that can hang with stuff like that. Also, you guys, if you join my Patreon, I compile a lot of this stuff for you. I'm trying to figure out one thing I can't do very well is organize my programs and whatnot. But for example, what the fuck is in the way? What's going on? Someone help. Okay, there we go. I compile things that are related to this stuff in my Patreon and in the Discord as well. You can join the Discord. People hang out in there and talk a lot in my absence. Oh no, did we crash? It looks like we crashed. Did that really just happen? I can't even tell. Well, give me a second, and it appears that Reaper may have crashed. No, Reaper did not crash. Okay. All of my meters have stopped moving, so I don't know if that's just a glitch or... Come on, you fucker. Certainly nothing's really working. Oh, there it is. Okay, good. I don't know why I can't... But yeah, what I was saying, I guess, is that here you go. Is that there are a lot of other elements to this story. One of them is pretty surprising realization that even Scientific American is starting to, I guess I can't put my DMT image thing back, so I'm just going to scale this up and then I'll get back to the chat. Even Scientific American has recently run an article that says that the brain is not necessary for thinking and complex tasks. So now they've kind of put themselves in a position where it's very difficult to maintain the exclusivity clause of the materialist paradigm and say that I'm not a big fan of woo, and I'm not trying to say that there are spirits floating around everywhere or that there's a creator God sitting around in the clouds doing whatever it is creator gods do, chucking lightning bolts at people and whatever people think they do. That's not it. But I think also that the removal of an integrated intelligence from the fabric of reality, which to me, and even people as smart as Michael Levin, apparently, it's fundamentally obvious that it's there. You are reducing the ineffable to the mundane, and in the process, you are creating a crisis of purpose and a ubiquity of depression that is, affecting every system on this planet at every level, really. The propaganda engines in the United States and other places, but especially in the U.S., well, China, like Korea and those kind of places, Russia, I'm sure is pretty bad. But the reason they're so effective, the reason that these people can be, antagonized into focusing on things like, I'm not saying that any group of people shouldn't have rights, but wedge issues, when there are, imminent catastrophes looming, you know what I mean? Or immigration and blaming all of the immigrants for your problems, or all of the stuff that they do, and also the savior complex they're able to give people that make them so invested in figureheads like presidents. That's only possible because they're empty and lost and afraid, and that is a byproduct of the constant demotion of the ineffable to the level of the mundane, right? The transcendental has been proven at this point to be the greatest therapeutic tool that we have available to us for just about any psychological aberration known to man, from addiction to PTSD and anxiety, all of these things. So when you remove that layer from reality and you excise the mundane from the day-to-day, or the ineffable, the transcendental from the day-to-day experience of people, it makes sense that you would end up with a worldwide crisis such as we were experiencing. And I don't think that process was accidental. It definitely seems to have been engineered with full knowledge of the consequences, because the consequences only fall on the proletariat and the common person and not upon the shoulders of the elite. So, no, that's not true at all, Lulu. Math and science are not woo-woo to people that have other ideas about reality. That's just not true. And that's really I think a very unfortunate position to take, because it allows people like Terrence Howard and Billy Carson to become massively famous and influential when, in reality, the fact is that wisdom and objective truth are not malleable. They're not dependent upon your opinion. They are not dependent upon your predilections and predispositions. Nothing about the methods of science, when they're properly applied, nor mathematics, is woo under any circumstances. They might be incomprehensible to people, but they're invariant, and they may be miscalculated theoretically from time to time. But I think equating science and mathematics with woo because there are people that don't understand them and don't have a worldview where they find these things useful is incredibly unfortunate. Obviously, I have my 1 foot in each world, and I think that it is, I would hope at least that it's obvious that bears fruits, and they're much more substantive than a person who is entirely like a new age flake that just believes any idea that comes along, usually because a lot of other people seem to, or at the same time an abject materialist who feels that the universe is dead and blind and pointless and random and meaningless. It is the integration of these things, and that integration cannot happen except in individuals who have respect for both arenas. And as someone who has approached mysticism and various esoteric traditions very seriously, I can't help but notice that because physicists have a learning curve that can't be overcome artificially. You cannot pretend. I mean, a couple people have, like, what's his name? That really phony Middle Eastern, Nassim Haramein. Everything that man says is absolute garbage. So it is possible from time to time for a person to, and also Terrence Howard, to sort of just assert that they are a genius mathematician or physicist. The problem with mysticism and esotericism is that anybody can do that. Anyone can just assert that. And one of the reasons in our society that we have such a prevalence of fake, fraudulent, new agey, crystal cruncher, put an amethyst up your butt and spindle twice kind of affairs, is that, we don't have a demographic that at least has a basic fundamental understanding of real initiated thinking. So they have no way of evaluating what is complete nonsense and what isn't, because there's no standard. Whereas we live in a society where, everyone has generally some kind of fundamental basis of understanding in mathematics. So people are more prone to detect a fraud like Nassim Haramein or Terrence Howard than they are people know a little bit of math. They don't know any mysticism. So, but that was an incredible talk given by that. I didn't even see his name. I didn't even look and see. I think I might have already closed. The first speaker we had was Michael Levin, who is a tremendous mind and almost like a spirit animal type of character in my mind. And oh man, here I have to look in my history. I have to give this guy credit because I need to know who that was anyways. And I knew that I would lose a couple of people when I mentioned that Nassim Haramein and Terrence Howard are frauds, and that sucks, not because I care, but it sucks for society that, it's not hard by either, and that's the crazy thing about mostly Billy Carson, is that anyone that has had any background of study in mysticism or ancient cultures would know immediately that this guy's making stuff up. And then in the case of Terrence Howard, everyone should know that it's garbage. The fact that anyone doesn't know is frankly terrifying. Neil Turok, that was that gentleman's name. So, yeah, there are other ways to extract truth, for sure. But that's not generally what I see happening with people that use one or the other system. You know, it really is true that not all systems were created equally, and the wisest thing you can do is to consolidate and compress, and then extract this syncretic. You know, the combination of two things of a lower nature that produce a third thing of a higher nature, you know. So at any rate, you guys, it is tremendously enjoyable for me to see these vectors in physics and these ancient systems forming in such a miraculous way. And I suspect that part of the reason for it is that, as we saw in the case of Michael Levin, being willing to, you know, a Harvard-educated leading scientific mind, being willing to entertain synchronicities as a indication that there is some sort of higher order of intelligence in the universe, and you know, the reflections of all of these ancient ideas of fundamental forces balancing each other exactly, and to the extent that these physicists are even looking for problems with their theories if they notice that not happening. And that is exactly what any sort of advanced initiate would do. So what I'm saying is it does seem that there is some influence, and they don't want to talk about it. You know what I mean? Their colleagues are going to judge them. That has actually restrained a lot of scientific development, I think, over the decades. Einstein gave some indications that he was more of a mystic than he would like his contemporaries to know. And also Jung very clearly styled the Red Book after Aleister Crowley's The Book of the Law, and the context was the same, the typeset, the style of the cover, the idea that it was a attempt at channeling something from the subconscious. The one was Novus. Oh, I can't remember. Liber Novus and Liber Legis. So they both had this, like, you know, Latin title. And I think he didn't ever want to acknowledge that influence because he had a professional mainstream career to maintain, you know. And I think one of the reasons that I shared this video of Michael Levin tonight is the same thing, that I think he's been a bit reticent, for understandable reasons, to really admit that he thought synchronicity could be significant, and that you know, that he really is leaning towards a panpsychic. You know, in his earlier interviews, you wouldn't hear him say it as explicitly as he did in that interview that I played tonight. So tremendously exciting times to be alive, even if there is some uncertainty and some imbalance. And I have kind of decided to restrict myself to an extent from talking about it, for one thing, because I'm sick of people that don't even, you know, they're religious. Let's imagine, for example, that somebody came out to support you, and you had enemies that tried to kill you, and some innocent person died, and then the next day you went golfing instead of calling the widow, and you know, you suggested them that maybe that person was actually evil enough to have set that up, and they say, like, you know, you're not thinking critically because you know what I mean? Like, it's just like the level of just like brain dead condescension. I don't have energy to be that angry all the time. So, you know, I even just spoke about it a little bit more than I wanted to, but I'm just trying to, you know, elucidate like the level of the absurdity of all of this stuff that we're living with on a day-to-day basis. And, you know, it's difficult. We have a choice to make. We can either keep silence and allow the problem to foment and spread and devour, or we can speak up and probably make absolutely no difference and have to deal with a bunch of anxiety and tension and dissonance. So I'm really on the fence about what to do about it, except that I know that getting to the heart of the matter and showing people that not only is there something to these transcendental states that is actually meaningful, the inspiration that I would hope can be drawn from the pretty much indisputable fact that there are incredible mergers in, calling it even mystical understanding is, that's not really quite right. Let's call it initiated thinking, or ancient wisdom, whatever. The fact that there's this emergence of an entirely new paradigm that's happening in every domain, from morphology and evolution to physics and consciousness, and also the initiated knowledge that corresponds to all of it is emerging into the light due to the fact that the initiates have decided that the time for secrecy is more or less over. And have I mentioned that I suspect that that's why the overlords are freaking out and trying to get control of everything so dramatically and desperately? Because, you really cannot control an illuminated person, and they don't need to be controlled. So that's why the indignation, the Comte de Phoenix said 250 years ago that the absolute rule of the state can only be a function of the absolute liberty of the individual will. And, that sounds like a paradox at first, but if you run it through your head a few times, it's not really that hard to understand. It's absolutely true. There is no societal revolution or change that is possible by changing parties, by changing isms, by changing leadership, unless that leadership is able to elevate the consciousness of the people in such a way that they organically conduct themselves in line with illuminated thinking. And then, and only then, could you have absolute rule, because the absolute rule would be dictated more or less by a sort of moral parameter that's dictated by the universe and not by the laws of man. So on that note, thank you guys so much for spending this time with me. Please consider, here, let me look at the chat and see if there's anything I really need to... What was I saying? Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I hope this was enjoyable. I got my own mind blown because I hadn't watched those videos all the way through, and I knew that there was some alignment happening between, the initiated lineage thinking and the world of physics and morphology and consciousness and all this stuff. But it is fucking crazy after all these years of uncertainty, and because that's part of the equation, you can't, that's the mistake that so many people make, to decide they think they know, for certain, anything, really. Like Dolores Cannon, she believed, I think, that she was really talking to aliens, maybe she may have been, but then she started saying things like, I learned last night how to cure every known disease instantly. Obviously not true, there's no way that I think she really even believed that. The point being that all of the failures in this sort of development, along these lines of development, amongst the capable, are because people become convinced that the voices in their head are correct. So it has been a long, hard road waiting for some sort of corroboration of all of these things, and it is absolutely important and necessary. A lot of people who develop a spiritual capacity seem to think that abandoning reason and common sense is a prerequisite for developing intuition. And that's a prerequisite for idiocy, for going off the rails on the woo-choo train. which doesn't help anyone. It's not good for anything. And by the way, you guys, if you join my Patreon and you would like some assistance in learning to navigate all of this stuff for yourself, because that's really the only way to do it. These religious systems where the requirement is that you place your development and your faith in a set of rules and some foolish book of ancient date designed to make you all feel great while you fold, spindle, and mutilate the neighbors from a neighboring state. You can't run a country or a person by a book of religion, not by a heap or a lump or a smidgen. So, the only real way to this kind of knowledge is through internal organic processes that are catalyzed in meaningful ways that are substantive, and it takes discipline and determination and intelligence and, a broad set of skill set. Otherwise, you will not get far, And anyways, so you can contact me through Patreon. We are having a retreat in August and September focused around coca and ambil and mambe and rape and ayahuasca and going to all of these crazy ruins, healing with chumpi stones, interaction with various shamans and healers in the Sacred Valley. And it's going to be tremendous, and I have already, most of the people that are coming are repeat people, so I know most of the group, and so I can assure you that it'll be a very easy social interactions. Everybody's really cool, so that's always a great variable to eliminate when you're getting people together for medicines, having a bunch of strangers. So we have room for maybe one or two more strangers. Yeah, well, somebody mentioned that every group has its own set of truths within it, but that's mostly because they were engineered by people that had initiated wisdom that were under the control of people that wanted to control populations of people. So that's no reason to preserve them or venerate them. In my opinion, they could all be set on fire and we wouldn't miss any of it. Christianity, it's clearly just an allegory for the sun. Jesus' entire ministry follows the exact campaign trail of Titus, and the reason is because it was designed by the Roman consulate. That's why they used as a template for the story one of their conquering generals' fucking military campaign trail to create the story. It couldn't be more obvious that it was designed by a government. And Jesus walking on water, light reflecting on water. I don't need to go through all this again. You guys have heard it a million times. The sun goes down, it's resurrected. The sun spends 3 days on the Southern Cross. It stops moving for 3 days. It dies for 3 days in December. You know what I mean? It's just ridiculous. It's absolutely absurd. But there are truths in there, and that is what people resonate with. But then all of the other crap and the ways that it's manipulated allows the overlords to get their clutches into them, and it has set back science and technology and culture by hundreds of years. It has resulted in genocides. That it's absolutely not worth it, because all of the knowledge that we had in there before, like don't throw rocks at hookers, love your neighbor, we already knew that shit. And then all of the deepest mysteries were obscured and veiled, and people's attention was taken from the truth and reality and turned, we had truth, but we found error because it was forced upon us. So I don't consider the fact that these religions had to be developed along the lines of some actual truth in order to get people to respond to them any kind of redeeming quality. That doesn't mean anything to me. In fact, it's kind of worse. It's a lie grafted upon a lie, grafted upon a lie, and then the truth is veiled in it. There was even a pope that referred to Christianity, referring to Christianity, said, the people need the truth veiled in myth. Literally, a pope called it a myth, And so the fundamental problem here is that it's not only that, but in the case of Christianity in particular, it fosters all kinds of different toxic forms of psychology. It makes sense to those people that someone else should suffer for the things that you do wrong. And then when the empire says, well, it makes sense that we should have Chinese child slave labor, and Elon Musk should have child slaves, and we should be paying people in South America 25 cents an hour to harvest fruit, and if they stop working, we'll turn guns on them, so that you can have a 2-car garage, and just like Jesus when he died for your sins, that's really what it's for. People have a really hard time swallowing that, but that's the facts. That's why these things were chosen. They were engineered the way they are in order to foster this kind of mentality in people, so that they could be exploited and so that they would tolerate the exploitation of others. And then people are like, but it has a good message. Yeah, once you get past all the incest and genocide and, you know what I mean? Give me a fucking break. There's no reason to, apologists for religion to me sound like apologists for the Nazis. It's like, well, they taught kids discipline and stuff, who cares? Who cares? It doesn't justify the rest of it. So, time to move on past Bronze Age myths, I guess. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm nuts, but it's how it's feeling. So, it's wild, man, but that's what's up. I mean, I'm not even a huge fan of Buddhism, because although it is true that once you eradicate all the dissonance patterns from your being, you can become a hollow tube to bring down fire from heaven, much like an audio receiver or something, But at the same time, to take all of the illuminated people and tell them to be, don't want anything, be detached from everything, hate your life, focus on suffering rather than joy, and, what I mean, seek liberation while you're alive, just sit there, don't get up. But you know what they would do if there was a war? They would go and tell all the monks they needed to fight. So, like he was saying, there's always some truth in it somewhere. But any institutionalized religion needs to be seriously just roundly rejected. I was going to say scrutinized, but there's no point. You don't need to do that. Just reject it outright, completely, without hesitation, without mercy. It's all, it's all a scam. It's all a sham, and you don't need it. You don't need it at all. You loved Audio Slave? Good. I'm glad to hear that. So, I think I've pretty much had my say about this, and I'm rather tired. So I think I'm going to play my guitar for an hour or something. I'm going to eat mushrooms tomorrow, and I might pop on for like an hour while my partner's putting my son to bed, and play a little bit of beshroomed music, because I keep scheduling these streams and then not making it for some reason, and I'll try to actually do it tomorrow. I think all the gear's working again. Maybe some deities were only telling their truths. What do you mean some deities were only telling their truth? What deities? Where? All of these deities are just, they're allegories for things, I suspect very strongly that a lot of the ancient cultures that are perceived as being primitive because they believed in all of these, various gods and whatnot, actually knew they were allegories for stuff, especially the Aztecs and the Incas, the Egyptians, the Greeks. I think that's pretty obvious. Even Aleister Crowley, who is regarded widely as like the greatest occultist magician, said over and over again throughout his works that these demons and stuff are not literally real. They're not totally unreal, but they're not like real in the way that this table is real either, obviously. If the human race was actually perpetually being attacked by demons and invisible dark spirits, none of your asses would be sitting around relaxing right now. It's just dumb to think that anyone would have any peace at all ever if there were evil, invisible forces constantly assailing us. The world is a fucking mess, but you have to apply Occam's razor. Look for the simplest explanation. And when you track all of the causes, you find humans. There's no reason to invoke demonic forces. On top of all that, the only people that have problems with these things are people that believe in them. And I've been able to track down at least 50 studies over 70 years from almost as many countries, and they all came to that conclusion when looking at this subject. So even if they are real, the obvious choice is to not believe in them because you have immunity. That's where that wisdom comes. The knowledge that a vampire cannot come in your house if you do not invite it. You know, so spirituality in the end does not require an openness to superstition. That's not what it is, in my opinion. It's not what it's for. That's not how it should be used. It's not helpful. It's not good. And it's one of the most unfortunate consequences, in my opinion, of the popularity of ayahuasca and DMT and spirituality in general. Because a lot of people don't get the proper idea, which I think is to dissolve culture-bound conceptualizations and mind-forged manacles and move beyond them, not to revert to older systems that might not suit your place in space and time. Yeah, some mushroom shredding will do me some good tomorrow, I'm sure. Get me primed for the retreats. Russell, I will play some Audio Slave for you tomorrow or soon if you attend the live stream. It's been a long time. I got to get my voice back in order because I'm pretty hoarse at the moment. But anyways, it's getting late, and thank you guys so much for spending time with me. Please consider becoming a patron because I am demonetized, so I get no support from YouTube. There are options to make a one-time contribution in the chat, and you can come and see us in person if you would like in August or September. So cheers, guys. Good night. Thank you all so very much.